Well, 15 years later, Washington, this was in 1770, Washington was with a group of men that were reviewing and kind of scoping out this same area. And an old Indian was part of an Indian band that discovered them and invited them to sit down in the council, around the council fire. And this old Indian chief gets up and he said, I was there. As a matter of fact, I was in command when the Indians and the French drenched this area with the blood of the soldiers. And we killed a lot of them, but we could not kill that man. He said, I had my best marksmen on him, and I told them they cannot miss, and they usually didn't miss. But this time, he said, we couldn't hit him.
And is this the same Indian that said, you will be a great leader of...
And that was his prophecy. He said, I'm telling you, the Great Spirit is with that man. He will one day be the great chief of a great nation. He cannot
preside over
die.
An empire.
He cannot die in battle.
How were there times, I mean, I get the impression that George Washington was tired a lot. But was he afraid?
I don't know that he ever showed that he was. Maybe he was, but he took on the British sometimes all alone. As a matter of fact, this is why we know this story. One of the men that was with him, one of his aides, wrote it down and reminded the troops later, like at Monmouth, when Washington he was so angry, he took on the whole British force almost at once. And here his aide reminded the troops, he won't die in battle. Don't worry.
Do you mean, was he afraid in battle? Is that your question?
Was he afraid of, I mean, I read the stories of the founders, and all of them didn't want to do what they did. They didn't want to be that person. They didn't want to say those things. They didn't, you know, I get the sense from all of the founders, they were like, really? Me again? You know what I mean? They did it out of duty and honor, mainly to God.
That's right.
But there are times when you're doing that you are like, okay, I trust, I have faith, but I'm afraid. Was he ever afraid?
Washington, there is no evidence in the record that he feared death. There's no evidence that he feared being injured in battle. What he was afraid of was that he was not up to the task, that he didn't have what America needed to provide the leadership that they were calling on him to provide.
He didn't at first, did he? When he first, I mean, the most surprising thing that I learned about George Washington, we think of him as a great general. He stunk on ice at the beginning for like a year or so. I mean, we lost New York, we lost everything. They were chasing him all around.
He grew into it.
He had to learn how to hit and run.
Yeah.
Because that's what he had to do.
Yeah. And it was really the crossing of the Delaware that changed things. Was there a moment of him saying, aha, or did he just start to do the right thing? How did that happen? Was there a moment for George Washington?
Well, I think it was a whole series of moments, but you know, in order to understand George Washington, you have to understand his self-perception and his understanding of his role. We know of at least 67 occasions during the Revolutionary War alone when he said that the American cause of independence would have come to a complete disaster except for one thing, and that was the direct intervention of God to save us. And later on, after he was elected president, he said the same thing about the Constitutional Convention. He used the word miracle more than once. It's a miracle. And he said later on, after he was elected president, that you would have to be, well, listen, is it okay? I mean, you use a chalkboard.
I tell you what, yeah, hang on. We have to take a break, but I want to pick it right up there. If you will share that, and let's talk a little bit, because people say, oh, no, he was a deist. He didn't really believe in God. He was crazy, white, rich, slave owner deist.
They need to read the book.
All right, so hang on just a second. We'll come right back with that. with Andrew Ellison, co-author of The Real George Washington, and Earl Taylor, the president for Center for Constitutional Studies. This is the best book on George Washington I have ever read because it is so simple and it really focuses on his words. You know, I say all the time, read original sources. Read original sources. Read their words. Don't read somebody who's trying to figure out what he meant, you know, today. Read their words, and about half of this book is just his words on topic. And the story of George Washington, I promise you, you will fall in love with him. And if we can be more like him, if we can strive to be more like him, we'll survive. We'll do more than survive. We'll thrive. Okay, so we were talking before we went into the break about George Washington and God. You were saying you wanted to read something out of it.
Well, it's true, as you said, that a lot of people say that George Washington and some of the other founders were deists. Mm-hmm. And a deist is understood, certainly today, as somebody who believes in God, but believes that God basically wound up the universe and then took off and said, good luck. Tell me if this sounds like a deist. After attributing the salvation of America on dozens of occasions to God's intervention, he said this after being elected president: "No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency." And this is almost incredible to me. But he also said, when I contemplate the intervention of Providence in guiding us, I feel almost overwhelmed. I feel that nothing is due to my personal agency. That is truly remarkable.
These guys, you know, I've read the words in the diaries of Columbus and the Pilgrims and many of the founders. I'm currently studying George Whitefield and reading his words. They all got to a point to where they were like, okay, I don't have the hands on the steering wheel. Of course, I didn't have any cars. I don't have my hands on the reins. They all thought and I think knew that this is a God thing that's happening here.
Right.
You know? I go ahead. You were going to say.
I was going to say, in this book, the word providence is used 88 times in Washington's quotes. And that's just providence. There's other almighty, divine. I mean, it's
They'll say now that he was just he's just saying that.
No. Well,
let me ask you this. I made George Washington faith, hope, and charity. I made Washington hope because I was trying to figure out why that Obama hope doesn't work, and because it's false hope. It's not telling you the truth. And I mean, it's ironic to me that we make up a lie about I shall not tell a lie on George Washington when there's so many great truth stories with him. Would you say that he's the best example of hope?
Can I answer that question?
Yeah.
You hit the nail right on the head, Glenn. There is no figure in the history of this nation that represents hope as well as George Washington. And just let me give you a couple of reasons why I believe that. One, we've already been talking about. And it is so astonishing to me that we have writers today who say that not only that the founders were deists, but in some cases atheists. Now, George Washington was the most vocal, but virtually all of them said that the reason that this country was created was because of the intervention of God. And nobody said it more often or more effectively than George Washington. But the other thing is this, and if that, by the way, when you consider who these men were and what they accomplished, you know, these were the most brilliant and the most insightful political philosophers and statesmen
in the world.
In one place, at one time in the history of the world. And here they're all saying it was God who used us to do this. And you have to ask yourself, were they all wrong? No, they weren't.